Well, it's me again. Good morning. Welcome to God's virtual house these days from me here in Istanbul. And a happy Mother's Day to all the people in my communities and beyond. And a wonderful remembrance this week of the end of the war in Europe and the brave Canadians who fought in the Netherlands and freed Holland from the Nazis. And so we're thankful for our vets and our very few World War II vets that are out there still doing God's work and liberating us all. So blessings. Oh, our passage for today is from John chapter 14, verses 1 to 14. So if you want to put me on pause, it's great now. You can put the minister on pause and you can read the passage and then we can continue. So, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable in your sight. O God of challenges, O God who releases us from fear. Well, the passage today is a kind of a releasing from fear, I hope. And it also has the wonderful passage, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And of course, it can be quite controversial. For me, as sort of the Pentecostal Unitarian, I've always believed that Jesus is my way, my truth, and my life. But I don't think, and I'm sitting in the middle of Turkey now celebrating Ramadan, that other faiths and other religions don't have a way to God in the same way that we do as Christians. So that's my starting off. But I've had some experiences with my way, my truth, and my light when I've always driven, when I drive up to go shopping in Asbestos, I go by the French Baptist Church, and they have a gigantic sign in front of their church that says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I don't, because someone has a more orthodox theology, and no one calls Reg orthodox, if someone has a more orthodox theology, I don't call them yahoos or deplorables. They're God's people. But I'll tell you a story. After a few years when I was in Danville, I got a call from Judy Frost around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. She says, the church is on fire. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean, the church? She says, no, it's the Catholic Church. It's on fire. Come see. So I got dressed and went down to Water Street and Daniel Johnson, and the church was on fire. And it was a terrible event. And I met up with Father Darasha. He was behind the church in the cemetery, and he was in tears, and I was in tears. And he says, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have a funeral tomorrow. So I dug into my pocket, and I gave him the keys to the church. Didn't have a meeting, gave the keys to the church, and said, here, use our church for the funeral tomorrow. And a few days later, the Anglicans did the same thing. The Carmelites that were still there at the time, the nunnery, they gave them a place to worship, the chef de Colombe. Everybody in the community worked together, except for our friends in the Baptist church up the road. And I wasn't mad, but I was disappointed. Disappointed in that they didn't have the joy of coming together as a community. They didn't have the joy of barn building like rural congregations do. I was so pleased. The first group of people to give the church, it wasn't very much, but to give them a check to rebuild their church was done from the United Church in Danville. And it was a blessing working together. The Carmelite nuns became sort of part of our community. When we had a roast beef or pork supper, they would always call for takeout. And we gave them the family rate because they were sisters. Anyway, we had a lot of fun rebuilding and getting to know each other because it wasn't easy. A year before I came, some kids had graffitied on the door of the church, Anglos go home. And of course, in the Eastern Townships, we are home. But it was a difficult time. It had always been a difficult time because during the asbestos strike, I think in 1948, during that strike, the English had been in management. The English a lot of them had been scabs. there'd been a lot of ill feelings in the community towards each other. There had been literally two solitudes. The fire, even though it was a terrible disaster, brought our communities together. And so now the English community and the French community, what's left of the English community, has a much better relationship. And that's the whole point of the sign, is it not? I am the way, the truth, and the life. For each and every one of us, especially now with the lockdown, when we have so much time, I call it for me a slowdown. But when we have so much time to reflect on our way with God, our journey with God, and the life that we live in community, that doing, later on in the passage, it talks about the works that we can do that even are greater than the miracles that Jesus did in his lifetime. The things we can do in community to set people free. The volunteer work, the work that's done at the Wales Home, and the other community events. The hardest thing I've been hearing from the community is, the Richmond Fair, it's been canceled. Coming together as community is part of who we are. Being the hands and feet of Christ in a troubled world is about who we are as a people. And so we should never see the church as a lifeboat, that it's our church that only has the way to God. It's the whole community. There are many, 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 many boats out there. There are many desires out there that if we share the life jackets and we share the lifeboats, that we will build a new community of faith that Jesus calls us to do. So when someone says, and my Baptist friends would always say, especially when they found out I was the first gay minister in Danville, they would come to me, Reverend Jennings, are you saved? And I would say to them, well, of course. Isn't everyone? God didn't make no junk. We are all part of God's creation. And I figure if we truly believe in a loving God, then that God is going to be with the people who don't believe, the people that are the most vulnerable. Because I have the blessing of belief. It came with my dear Mother Pearl, who was the good storyteller. And on this Mother's Day, we remember all the good storytellers. But she was a Sunday school superintendent. She used to do all the things that were necessary to help her kids in her class. And I can remember her inviting the Friedmans, who were Jewish in St. Jerome, to all of the social activities that the church had, because they didn't have anybody. To be the hands and feet of Christ in a troubled world. To be the miracle that God calls us to be. So may you have faith on your way, on your journey. And may you find your truth. And may, when you wake up in the morning, look in that mirror and ask yourself, what kind of life can I lead? Thanks be to God. Amen.